Firstly, I will introduce the area and myself, then talk about Orton and a little of Orton's history. We'll then move up onto the fells, where I'll talk about the famous karst scenery and the two national nature reserves. Briefly, we'll look at the birds and the flowers and finish with the effects man has had on the fells. It's a vast area to cover, so let's get on with it. I'll start by introducing the area, which I suspect a number of you may not be familiar with. I personally was delighted when we became part of the Yorkshire Dales National Park in 2018, and this followed a long consultation period and a public inquiry. The map shows the Yorkshire Dales, and the Orton Fells is the northern part, identified as Eden District. It extends roughly from Kirby Stephen in the east to Shap in the west, approximately 12 miles distant. It's never been part of Yorkshire and was formerly in the county of Westmoreland. Okay, Ken? These are now the park boundary signs for our area, and I think a gesture appreciated by many local people. Thank you, Ken. How did I come to Orton? Both my parents were Scottish, mother coming from near Callander, and you can see mother there presenting the cup. Father was from the west coast of Scotland. He was studying medicine at Edinburgh when the war broke out. He left Edinburgh University to become a pilot and then resumed his studies after the war. I was curious and asked mother why how we'd come to Orton. And she said once father had qualified, jobs were fairly scarce and there wasn't really much choice. So we almost came to Orton by default. But for me, this led to an idyllic childhood. I went to the village school, which I enjoyed enormously. However, after primary schooling had finished, my parents packed me off to Sedbergh, which to my surprise, I enjoyed immensely. I went on to become a chartered surveyor, which enabled me to work locally in Penrith, where I was a director of a local agricultural company. Apart from my education, I've always lived in the village. I've been on the parish council for nearly 50 years and I'm chairman of the council. I'm also chairman of the Manor Court, which I'll talk about later. Okay, Ken? Welcome to Orton. We're going to take a quick trip round the village, pointing out some of the more important buildings. And at this stage, I ought to thank a fellow councillor, David Potter, who ostensibly bought a drone for his children and has very kindly taken all the pictures of the village for me. This is a shot from the south of the village. And I'd just like to quote from Wainwright, who at one time, Mrs. Alfred Wainwright, who at one time considered coming to live in the village, but he was outbid on the house he was going for. And Wainwright wrote, "Orton is one of Westmoreland's loveliest villages, a delightful rural settlement built around a central green, with two streams crossed by many footbridges and having many venerable buildings. It has a fine church on a hill overlooking tranquil countryside." And that description's hard to add much to, other than say, there's the village. You can see the land sloping up to the Orton Fells at the rear. It was formerly known as Scare Overton, which means township under the Scar, and the Scar is the big hill at the back of the village. The villagers refer to the village as the front of the village, which is the left of the picture, the west, and the back of the village, which is to the right, and that's the east of the village. So thank you, Ken. This is the centre of the village, and that was the property right in the middle is where I went to school. That was the senior school, and the little square, which we're partly obscuring, was where we used to have our playground and run about. The white building on the left of the picture is the public bar of the George Hotel, the hotel being out of picture. And bottom right, which Susan Shan seems to be on my screen covering, is the Market Hall. Right, could we move on, Ken? This is going further up the main street, and Orton's still very fortunate to have a village shop and post office, and those are the white buildings you see down there. That's the road out to Shap, and those are the Eastern Lakeland Fells that you can see in the distance there. Thanks, Ken. This is Orton Hall. Sorry, that's not Orton Hall, that's Petty Hall. It was called the Old Orton Hall. Built in 1604, a grade 2 listed building, a grade 2 star listed building, I ought to say, has fine internal features, all original. And someone told me yesterday it was on the market. So there you go. If anyone's interested in coming to Orton to live, £750 will pick up the £50,000, I ought to say, will pick up Petty Hall. The barn next door doesn't go with it. That's in different ownership. That was built in 1740, and there's currently a planning application on it. Thanks, Ken. The church. It's a prominent position, and there's been a religious building here since Saxon times. The present structure dates from a number of periods. The tower is Norman, and apparently during periods of unrest with the Scots was used for shelter. Doing research on the church, I find that there's 6,500 burials in the churchyard. And if you could see the size of it, that's an awful lot. Anyway, let's move on. This fine building is Orton Hall. It's a grade 2 listed Jacobean mansion. It was originally built by Richard Byrne, the vicar of the village, for nearly 50 years. It was always the village squire's house, but when I was a child, it lay empty. And as children, we used to play in there and terrify ourselves. Thanks, Ken. I ought to say it's now been converted into apartments, and it's used for holiday and permanent use. This is the hub of the village. It's the Market Hall. It was built in 1865 by public subscription. The two gable structures didn't exist then, and carts would be drawn in the south end and unloaded in the hall and then taken out on the north end. You can just see the market bell tower, and the bell still survives in there. That's plonked on the top of the market hall. Today I said it was the hub of the village. It houses all meetings, parish council meetings, Manor Court meetings, and it's also the doctor's surgery, and an important building. Thanks, Ken. And you can see outside it, this is the farmers' market, held on the second Saturday of every month. Orton was granted a market charter in Edward I's time, and like all markets, you can see there's a lot of gossiping going on there. In 2001, it was visited by Prince Charles, who soared in my esteem. He ate produce at every stall he went round, and then had lunch with the parish council. Marvellous effort on his part. Thank you. This is Silver Yard, and it's a new building, and it houses the Orton Scar Cafe on the right, and the Yorkshire Dales National Park office on the left. The Yorkshire Dales office is staffed by a great bunch, and I've really missed going in there and having coffee and a natter with them during this lockdown period. Two of the rangers live in the village with their partners and are very popular members of the community. Thanks, Ken. Move on, Ken. That's the chapel. East Road, this is the back of the village. The building on the far left was the Temperance Hall, and that's where I started my infant schooling. Temperance was apparently very strong in Orton in the mid-19th century, which is quite surprising because there were 4 pubs in the village. Moved to the far end, being slightly obscured, is the White Building, and that's the current school, which I also went to. I had a lot of education in Orton, you can tell that. When I was there were 75 pupils, and I'm pleased to say there's between 75 and 80 nowadays. So the school is still thriving. You can see I was just going to show the open fields back there, leading up to the Knot, which is the highest point of the Orton Fells. And we'll come on to that later. Thanks, Ken. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the village. Today, Orton has a population of about 250, with 550 in the parish as a whole. Unlike many villages, it's retained a good number of local amenities. There's a shop, post office, 2 cafes, a chocolate factory, hotel and pub, and of course the village school. However, in the 19th century, the village population was almost 3 times today's, with virtually every business imaginable. You could have clogs made for yourself, a suit. There was agricultural produce. In other words, the village was virtually self-sufficient and actually exported a wide range of agricultural produce, including 560 pairs of knitted stockings a week, most of which went to Kendal. But there were 2 things that set the village apart from other rural communities, and these were the Manor Court and the right to elect a vicar. Today, these may seem relatively unimportant things, but at the time, it meant that Orton was virtually a self-governing community. I'll just briefly look at those 2 things. The freeholders' right to elect a new vicar. This was an advowson purchased by the independent landowners for £570 in 1618. And what it meant was the Fairfies, who were 12 wise men in the village, invited candidates for a vacancy, and these candidates were then invited by the Fairfies to visit the village, take a service, preach a sermon, and then the Fairfies held an election with only the freeholders voting. And it's amazing that this was totally independent of any church hierarchy. It was pure within the village. It resulted in some outstanding vicars, and from 1600 to 1900, Orton only had 9 vicars. But the system also resulted in some frightful eruptions amongst the villagers, the most notable being during the English Civil War, when the church door was broken down by warring candidates and their supporters. The last election was in 1957. And my father played a part in this, in that he produced the last vote from a patient up Breatherdale, which resulted in a tie. Both vicars had exactly the same number of votes. This had never happened before. And the chairman of the Fairfies settled it by tossing a coin. So it's probably just as well that the system has now ended. It's sad it has ended. I think it became redundant because there just weren't enough vicars about. And nowadays we don't even have a vicar in the village. The second thing I mentioned was the Manor Court. Again, this was a right acquired by the freeholders in the early 17th century for £570. I know that's the same as they paid for the Avowson, but that's just coincidence. Just to simplify things, all it meant was that the freeholders were in fact the lord of the manor. And the Manor Court, which was staffed by the freeholders, decided all issues relating to land. And back in those days, this had huge implications when the enclosures were taking place. And it meant that the Manor Court largely controlled what was going on with the enclosures. It was also able to impose fines for transgressions. And when I looked at the registers, I saw my wife's family name, Borough, appears a number of times on them, which she wasn't very pleased about. Today, the court manages and charges rents for what are known as the waste and common lands. It's also responsible for parts of the village, including the market hall. It no longer levies fines. I'm the current chairman, and I understand that it's one of the only manor courts still existing in the country, and maybe the only court. Now, both the Advowson and the Manor Court were largely unique to the village. And I think that Orton, in the past and probably is now, it was a very proud and independent community. Okay, I think we'll finish with the village and boots on and up onto the fells, Ken. Oh, Ken, I don't think the... Right. Yeah. There was a rather nice story attached to those two gentlemen, but I haven't got time to relate it, unfortunately. This map is a more detailed map of the Orton Fells, and it shows the high limestone plateau and the northern plateau fringe, which we relate to as the Orton Fells. I said before, they stretch approximately from Kirby Stephen to Shap, which is up on the top left corner. That's about 12 miles. And at its widest point, it's probably about 8 miles. So it's a fairly small area. I'm told that this was once under a warm, shallow sea near the equator, which has created the classic karst scenery. I'll quickly run through the characteristics of this type of landscape. So could we move on, Ken? This is the top of the knot, Orton Knot. It's at a height of 1,400 feet. Those are the Howgills in the background. The highest point of the Howgills is the Calf, and that's about 850 feet higher than where we are here. If you could move on, Ken. This is the most obvious feature of the fells, and principally why they're so well known. This goes on and on across the top of the plateau. I'm told it's the largest area of unspoilt paving in the country. And another characteristic of the area are the far-reaching views. If you can see my wife struggling across the paving, You're looking across the Eden Valley behind her to the Pennines. Thank you, Ken. We'll miss out that one. Local people call the stones the shining stones, and you can see when they're wet, the light is reflected from them, and from a distance to the north at Great Aspey, it looks like a giant mirror sometimes. And at night, if there's a full moon or a very bright moon and the pavement's wet, you get exactly the same effect, but it's a rather haunting sight. Thanks, Ken. Thanks. Grikes and clints, grikes being the clefts in the rock and clints the top of the limestone. Grikes, as you walk across, I was on them 2 or 3 days ago. Some of the grikes are about 15, possibly 20 feet deep. And surprisingly, they're still growing ferns even then. I think there's some quite rare ferns up there. Thank you, Ken. The pavement is interspersed with heathland areas, the nature reserve has not been grazed for about 20 years. So you're seeing an area of ground there that's had no livestock on it for quite some time. There's a myth that everywhere becomes impenetrable when it's not grazed. And that sure is quite easy to move across. However, recently a magnificent herd of Highland cows has been introduced, and this is going to give some sympathetic grazing to the area. Okay, Ken? Springs are another feature of limestone areas. Many actually appear on the same contour line. This is Chapel Beck that flows through the back of the village, many of the other villages in the area have grown beside the clear waters of limestone springs. Orton has 2. Great Aspey has the very attractive Helen's Well, and Crosby Ravensworth and Moll's Meeburn are both on the Lie Vennet. Thanks, Ken. Springs are often associated with caves, and here we have the area's only large cave. This is west of Great Aspey, and you can see the hole just below that limestone escarpment there. It's quite a large cave, it's over 1,000 feet in length, and I've been down it on a number of occasions. It's rather an oppressive place. It doesn't have attractive formations like some of the Dales caves. It's almost like a mud tunnel. It finishes in a sump, which is where the water just comes up to the roof of the cave. And I believe it has been dived, but it's not been explored fully. Thank you, Ken. Dry valleys are another feature. This was taken on Gaithen Plain, photographed from the Appleby Road. Are far better shots of dry valleys, but this one was particularly interesting because it shows a debris field in the foreground. 10,000 years ago, sheets of ice moved across this area, and it's carried these boulders almost 10 miles from the Shat Fell. And when the ice started to melt, it lost its powers of transporting these boulders and has dropped them right the way up the valley. It extends far further than you can see. It goes way up to the left. Thank you, Ken. This is a close-up. They're known as erratics, and this is a close-up. And you can see how this Shat granite boulder has just been deposited on limestone paving. They're actually pink. It's lichen, the green you can see on this side. local people refer to them as thunderstones. And I think earlier generations, because they didn't have any idea where they'd come from, and they realized they weren't a feature that came locally, thought there was something that was created by the thunder. They had no idea they'd come all the way from the Shap Fells. Just to enlarge on this photograph, you can see the Pennines behind, and that big cleft in the Pennines is a wonderful feature. It's called High Cup Nick. And if any of you fancy a walk out one day, it's a great walk. Okay, Ken, thank you. Now we'll move on to nature reserves and areas triple SIs. Although the Orton Fell area is relatively small in size, it has much to offer the national park, and I'll just run through what there is. There are 2 national nature reserves. Remember, I'm talking about an area that's about 12 miles by 8 miles. It's got 2 national nature reserves, Great Aspy Scar and Smarvo Gill, a site of European site of special scientific interest, and that's Sunbig and Tarn. And then there are numerous triple SIs dotted round the place. I'm not going to dwell on the Aspy Scar Nature Reserve because most of the photographs you've seen come from there. However, we'll move on, Ken, to the Smarvo Gill Nature Reserve, which is just 5 miles away, but couldn't be more contrasting. This is the top of the nature reserve, and that lovely old bridge down there is Smardale Bridge. And I'm told there used to be a little inn there, and it's a drover's road coming over from Kirby Stephen. When Ken saw the slide, the picture, he pointed out the earthworks top right, just to my my left, or my right as you look at it. We both disagreed on what they were, but there is an ancient settlement there that's long since been abandoned called Severals, and Ken thought it was for keeping rabbits. They used to have rabbit. Ken, you maybe can explain what you thought it was later. And those are the Howgills in the background. So let's move down the valley, Ken. And this is the very exciting viaduct. It's the nature reserve is centered along the disused railway line between T-Bay and Darlington, where it runs through the Smardle Valley. Unlike the Aspy Scar Nature Reserve, it's largely wooded, which is a stark contrast to the fells above Orton. The only thing that I think it has in common is it's on limestone bedrock. The railway embankments here have a rich variety of wild flowers and insects. There's a strong red squirrel population, and salmon and sea trout spawn in the lovely beck in the bottom there, which is called Scandal Beck. There's a path on the railway line, which is managed by Cumbria Wildlife Trust, and it's about 4 miles in length, including the crossing of the viaduct, which is very exciting. And Ken tells me under the 4th arch, raven nests. So look out for that when you're going. Let's move on, Ken. This is Sunbig and Tarn and the pasture around it. Again, very contrasting. This is a European site of special scientific interest. It's considered to be the most important site in Britain for petrifying springs with tufa formations. And if anyone wants to know about those, I'll try and explain later. They're quite complex things. It's also only one of 3 sites in the UK where the sand bowl snail exists. and that is an absolutely minuscule little snail, which isn't terribly exciting. The tarn is a marl lake and really shouldn't exist, being on limestone. However, glacial deposits and erosion have caused it to form. The surrounding heathland has a wonderful variety of wildlife, and there are special arrangements now being made for the management of this area in terms of the grazing. Okay, Ken. I couldn't resist putting this in. This is my favourite valley in the Orton Fells. It's got the rather unglamorous name of Potts Valley. This is looking down the valley. There's all sorts of wonderful screes, escarpments, and formations. And you're looking towards the Pennines and indeed High Cup Nick again there. Okay, Ken. This is the lower end looking west. The interesting thing about this stream is part of it flows into Sunbiggin Tarn, which means that it then goes on to flow into the Lune. But the part we're looking at now flows into the River Eden, and that flows up towards Carlisle, so completely different directions. The stream, Ken, if you move on, the stream is noted for this little chap, the common crayfish. Sadly, it's not anything like as common now. And virtually every stone you tip over in that valley, in the stream, has one of these underneath it. It's a very clean, unspoilt stream. It doesn't take much pollution to see these chaps off. Okay, Ken? I wasn't going to put the birds in, so we'll just quickly run through them. That was the grouse, golden plover, a short-eared owl on Sunbiggin Tarn, hunting on Sunbiggin Tarn. Okay, Ken? And the curlew, my favourite bird. And we were just talking about them before coming in now. And sadly, they've become a lot rarer in this district. And those are up on the limestone. That's a flock of golden plover. They come here in the autumn and they come here in the spring when they're going to go back to Scandinavia. Okay, Ken. This next set of slides, we're getting quite well on now, are the Orton Meadows and the Orton Pastures. And at the point where I've taken this photograph, J.M. Turner, the artist, sat on the very spot and made a sketch of Orton and the fells behind. And I've been to the Tate Gallery to see it. It's in one of Turner's Yorkshire sketchbooks. We're looking down from Orton Scar towards the village, and you can see the White Church Tower there. Beyond there, you can see the Lune Gorge, and that's where the M6 motorway runs in the distance there. Most of the hills you see in the background are actually in the Lake District National Park. The fields you see in the foreground before the village are the Orton Meadows and the Orton Pastures. Many of them are triple SIs, and all the flower shots that I'll show you next are taken there until we reach the Roadside Verges. And the field directly in the foreground is one of the finest wildflower pastures in the country. And this is a late autumn photograph. We'll quickly flick through these, Ken. You've just seen scabious. This lovely little flower is Grassa panassus. Now, just to my left ear, there's a little purple flower, which I don't know what it is. It's not a knapweed, so if anyone comes to tell me afterwards what it is, don't be saying it's a knapweed, because it's not. This is a lovely bank of betony, and you can see some great burnet in amongst it. Okay, Ken. And this is another hay meadow. You can see melancholy thistle there, and hawkbit, the yellow flower, in amongst it. Lovely meadows, these. We've now moved on to the Roadside Verges. And this is a verge with a fabulous showing of orchids. I'm not very good on orchid identification, but I think they're either early purple or common marsh orchids. Move on, Ken. And that's a betony with the burnet moth, and it can either be the 7-spotted or the 10-spotted, depending on how many are on its back. You can count them. Okay, Ken. This is a lovely little footpath leading down to the village, and it's the route that the coast-to-coasters take when they're staying in the village. And we get Australians, Americans, even had Chinese doing the coast to coast, and this is the route they take. And some of the people in their blogs about it write the most wonderful things about their descent into the village. But it's a relatively short window when you see these. You've really got to be there between June and August. Okay, Ken. We're back to the Roadside Verges again. Sadly, these have got mixed up, but it doesn't matter. This is a different sort of orchid. Might be fragrance orchids, I don't know. There's bound to be someone out there saying I'm wrong. You can see the road to Shap in the background. This is at Knot Lane End, again, a roadside verge, and you're looking up at the knot there. Okay, Ken? Right, we finished with flowers and verges. This is the final section, and I'm briefly going to look at the effects that man has had on the Orton Fells, starting in prehistoric times and coming right up to the present day. And this is the Gameland Stone Circle. It's located just below the knot, and that, you saw it before in the early village picture photographs. It's probably about a mile to the village from here. Gamelands is one of Cumbria's largest stone circles. All the stones have fallen, and with the exception of one stone, are all Shap granite. So even Neolithic man was moving these erratics about. Some of the geologists nowadays get very angry with farmers for moving them about. But this was being done 2,500 to 3,500 years ago. Next, Ken. This is another shot close up of the stones. They can be quite atmospheric sometimes, rather spoilt by the power lines in the background. But under the Westmoreland Dales Landscape Partnership, which I heard one or two of you talking about earlier on, these electric poles are going to be moved and the wires undergrounded. The scheme has also got 4 apprentices who've actually fenced off the stone circle, and the farmer's given permission for the area to be turned into a wildflower meadow. So in time, there'll be some rather attractive wildflowers growing inside and around the stone circle. Thank you, Ken. Stone Age tools. These probably post-date the stone circle, but were found in fields neighbouring the circle. There are a marvellous collection of arrowheads, knives, scrapers, and some of them are very intricately manufactured. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm handed something and told it's a scraper or a Stone Age tool, it's very difficult to envisage how it's been used. But there's little doubt that these have been very, very intricately manufactured. They're lovely, lovely items. Ken, if you next shot, there's just a close up. You can see an arrowhead in the top there, and scrapers at the bottom, and knives in the middle. Okay, Ken? And the chap who found them, you'd see him plodding across the ploughed fields. I wondered what he was up to, and until someone told me. He's put his collection on display here at the farmers' market in the market hall. Okay, Ken. This Ministry of Work sign, these used to be very common in the Orton Fells area, and they indicated where there was a burial cairn. And sadly, there's only one remaining now, and all the rest have disappeared. Ken? And you can see the one just on the top of this burial cairn, which is above the small hamlet of Sunbiggin, which is about 2.5 miles to the east of Orton. It's an absolutely magnificent position, and it looks down. Those are the Howgills you can see in the background there, and it looks down Bowderdale towards Yarlside, which is that independent hill in the middle, and beside it is Courtley Spout. You've got Randygill Top, Greenbell to the left, and gosh, I can't remember, Greenfell leading up to the Calf on the right. When I visit here, I always wonder what the outlook would have been like when the occupant of the tomb was placed there, and whether the people who placed him there would recognize the view today. It's one of history's tantalizing things, that. It was excavated in the late 19th century by a Canon Greenwell, who would now be regarded as little more than a grave robber. However, he records that placed in a hollow in the limestone was a skeleton over 6 feet in height. It was placed in a fetal position with the hands at the head clasping a chert. A chert is a limestone implement. So that's a very interesting and lovely thing. It's a little bit off the beaten track on the Orton Fells, and it's not so easy to find. Hence, that's why it's probably kept the Ministry of Work sign. Okay, thank you, Ken. In amongst the limestone, you have this strange formation. It's a natural feature, and it's called Castle Foals. It was exploited by Iron Age man, and it's about the size of a football pitch. It slopes slightly, and when you move up onto it, you can quite clearly see the walls surrounding the area, and you can see the walls of the little roundhouses that they had up there too. It's a fine defensive position and a good place probably to keep cattle. However, I've always wondered where their water came from. Now they've got cattle up there, you sometimes see them in amongst on that plateau area, and they're very impressive. It's a fine sight, and a nice view of the limestone there. Okay, Ken. You're going to wonder what on earth this has got to do with the Orton Fells, and the answer is probably nothing. There is no evidence that the Romans came anywhere near the Orton Fells, and yet this iconic relic was found by metal detectorists near Potts Valley. It's known as the Crosby Garrett helmet, and about 4 or 5 years ago was very much in the news. It was a magnificent find, but it's a great tragedy that although it has been displayed in the Tully House Museum in Carlisle, it is in private ownership. It was sold by the owner, the local farmer, through Christie's, and it fetched around £2 million. Just think, in public ownership, this would have been at the forefront of Hadrian's Wall exhibitions and would have been an absolutely superb draw for tourists to Cumbria. Next slide, please, Ken. I'm going to look now very, very briefly at quarrying, limestone extraction and mining. We're in the 19th century now, and this is the period that I think has had most impact on the Orton Fells. This is my wife examining a small redundant quarry. And there are many like this to be found all round the fells. They provided stone for lime kilns and building. Surface limestone was removed principally in the 20th century, early 20th century, for rockeries in gardens. Fortunately, it was only taken from areas that were easy to access, sort of peripheral areas, really. But some areas have been quite badly affected by this. Limestone paving is now protected by limestone paving orders. Mining was another feature in Victorian times, was quite limited in this area. But there's a copper mine and lead mine at Great Aspey and other small mines nearby. The main mine you can still go down if you're brave enough. It goes down about 200 meters and then comes to a rather scary roof fall. So anyone who goes down it needs to be careful. Thanks, Ken. Walls. These have always fascinated me in our area. Again, created with stone provided from the quarry, Orton Parish has hundreds of miles of dry stone wall. And if you just move through it, Ken, there's a wall up on the fell top. This is known as Pickering Close. Maybe it may have something to do with drovers. Many of the walls came with the enclosures of the mid-18th century onwards. And in former times, walling must have been a major industry with teams of builders, and there must have been hundreds of jobs involved in walling. Keep going, Ken, if you would. That's looking down on from the top of Orton Scar, and you can see walls dotting everywhere. Quite a characteristic. This is a wall on the top of Orton Scar. I walked past this today and it's still down. They don't have stock up on the top during the winter months, but that will take a farmer at least a day to replace. And you can see the rest of his walls in pretty similar condition. Okay, Ken. We were talking about lime kilns earlier. This is quite a good example. There are quite literally hundreds of lime kilns scattered around the Orton Fells, all in varying stages of decay. And I showed the quarry before. The quarries would be supplying the lime kilns as well. These became particularly prominent in the 19th century when coal was easily accessible as the railways reached these northern parts. How they worked was the coal was burnt there's an archway and a hollow in the bottom. The fire was in the bottom, and the crushed limestone was fed into an upper hopper, and they managed to reach very, very high temperatures. And I was at a Zoom meeting one day where they were talking about these things, and someone asked why the limestone didn't reach the same high temperatures, and somehow it doesn't. The design of these structures meant it didn't, which quite surprised me. The resulting lime was used for building or spread on fields to increase the productivity. I think I'm fairly confident in saying that there won't be anyone alive who's seen one of these in action, but I'd very much like to see one going and how it burns. Next slide, please, Ken. And it's funny that this slide should come up next, because this is the Orton Beacon, and this fine Celtic cross is a very prominent landmark up above Orton, and I've also been up here today. It was made in Crosby Ravensworth stoneworks, and it says on the inscription it was erected by the loyal subjects of Orton and Crosby Ravensworth to commemorate the Jubilee of Queen Victoria on the 21st of June, 1887, Midsummer's Day, 1887. We still have bonfires up here to celebrate Jubilees, and that's where I've actually seen the limestone turning into lime. The bonfires actually reach quite a high temperature. The bonfire to celebrate George IV's coronation was built too close to the cross, and it melted the lead letters and cracked the stone that the cross is put in. This is an old photograph, and it's subsequently been replaced. This area was formerly a beacon warning against Scottish raids. And when we have a Jubilee, it's remarkable the distance that you can see other beacons burning. This land belongs to Lowther Estate, not Orton Manor Court. The Lowther Estate has allowed limestone extraction for garden ornamentation. And you can see the effects of moving the limestone round the monument. It just becomes a sort of rubbly stone. They weren't actually meant to move stone around here, but these things are terribly difficult to enforce. Thank you, Ken. And this is the last slide. It's most of you are going to wonder what on earth that is. During the Second World War, the entire area was used as a training ground, and a motorized division was based in Orton for a time. These practice bombs are all that remain of the wartime. There is, I ought to add that there is folklore that a Bren gun carrier got stuck in and sunk in Sunbig Tarn, which is quite possible because it's a dangerous place. It's still supposed to be there, but whether that's the case or not, I don't know. When we were children, we used to mount expeditions from Orton to collect these things, and we were very ambitious. We used to set off back with one on each shoulder, but by the time we got halfway, we usually were down to one, and by the village, some people didn't have any. So there aren't anything like as many as there used to be up there. Okay, Ken. I think I was intending to pass these. These are the only important properties. Let me just, this is a nice one to finish on. So let me finish on it. I actually had asked for these to be removed, but they've reappeared, but it doesn't matter. This charming little building is the Dames School in Razbeck, and Razbeck is a little hamlet about 1.5 miles east of Orton. And this is on the village green in Razbeck, and it was paid for by the farmers, and they wanted to have their sons educated, and they paid for a dame to come and teach, who lived upstairs. It's a tiny, tiny building, hence the name Dame School. I think there are a few in the northern England, but the dame lived upstairs and she taught the children downstairs. There was an amusing story which I'll very quickly relate about this. In the middle of the 20th century, it was starting to fall into disrepair. And by perhaps the 1970s, it was quite dangerous. And the farmers held a meeting and decided that they would demolish it and use the stone for walling. Now, there was a local poet. He was I think his title was Cumbria's Poet. He's called Michael Finch, and he'd written a poem about this place. And I told him it was going to be demolished, and he decided to move heaven and earth to preserve it. And he knew someone in the who listed buildings, and managed to get this listed. And then went a little bit further, and all credit to him. Not only did he list it, but he also carried out some renovation to it as well. And there you see it as it is now. And there's a little display inside it with a history about the school. I think the poem's there too. And I think there's a little bit about the Manor Court, but I'm not certain about that. Well worth visiting if you're in the village. Okay, Ken, I think that about wraps it up. But before I hand over to you, Ken, can I say one thing? Yeah. If I've encouraged any of you to come and visit the area, what I would say is businesses, the little businesses, have had a torrid time in the last 12 months. And if you come walking or just to see the area, please call in and have a coffee or something in one of the cafes. They employ local people, and it means they'll be here another time when you come. So please use them if you come up to the Orton area. And I hope I've encouraged you to come and have a look round, because I bet a lot of you have no idea about it at all. Anyway, thank you all very much for listening.